Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Here Before, Here Now. November, Native American Heritage Month. So, love to highlight Native American voices and all different backgrounds. And today I'm actually interviewing an author named Mary Ruth Barnes. She has written the book Where Birds Land. And I'll read something really quickly about the book and what it's about. So, here's the sleeve on the inside. At the dawn of the 20th century, Chickasaw woman Ella McSwain is navigating the fate of her family against the turbulence of Indian Territory and its imminent establishment as Oklahoma. Just as Ella's mother, Esther McLish, fought for her son's recognition as a Chickasaw citizen on the Dawes Roll, Ella McSwain must now fight to receive her allotted land from the Dawes Commission. But the road isn't easy, and Ella encounters crooked businessmen, land grifters, and legal battles along the way. Will her family have land to call home by the end of her fight against injustice? Now, very interesting. I am not a reader, really, like in terms of like sitting down and reading a book. But when I was pitched the story, and I thought, okay, yeah, I'll take a look at the book, and they sent it over. I read it on like a Monday afternoon is when I got it, and I finished it within like 24 hours. So for me, it was definitely a page turner. And as you'll hear in the conversation with the author, the main character in this role, Ella, man, she just could not catch a break. So many things negative happened in her life, one right after the other. So this book really is about determination and also just pushing through, even though sometimes things can get pretty rough. And about the author, her name is Mary Ruth Barnes. I'll read her bio on the other sleeve inside cover. She is a Chickasaw artist, teacher, and writer. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in English from North Carolina State University and received her master's degree in education from Montana State University. She was named the 2015 Chickasaw Nation Dynamic Woman of the Year and in 2019 received the Women in the Arts Recognition Award from the Oklahoma chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. So I pre-taped or pre-taped the interview with the author a few days ago, and she taught me a lot about her family because this is all based on articles and documents and family stories about what her grandmother went through in order to try to get land that was, in a sense, hers to begin with. Very interesting. So take a listen to this, and we'll wrap it up afterwards. Mary Ruth Barnes, thank you so much for joining us for Here Before, Here Now. I have to say, I read your book, Where Birds Land, and I am not lying when I say it was quite the page turner. Tell me about the process of your writing this book and where it really came from.
Well, originally, Colton, I found that by researching my great great grandmother and my great grandmother, that the documents I was looking at was from paper documents that had been Xeroxed over years. So sometimes they were difficult to read, but the documents I was looking at was the Dawes transcripts. And so I originally went to Tishomingo, Oklahoma. At that time, about 15 years ago, everything was just pretty much paper. As the Culture Center was developed in Sulphur, Oklahoma for the Chickasaw Nation, I started going in there and I found that the documents with the Dawes transcripts were recorded and put in sequential order. What I had was paper that was often out of order. So I would have to work on a timeline to do my research. But these transcripts were over probably every 3 months to 6 months. And my relatives would go to different places in Oklahoma in a wagon and be interviewed with grueling questions about when they married, who they married, how many kids, where did they live, and then who was your next husband, why did you marry him, et cetera, et cetera. Well, my great great grandmother was Cherokee. Her father was Cherokee and her mother was Choctaw. And she married and outlived 4 Chickasaw men. One was a national jailer. One was a constable for the Chickasaw Nation. One was the brother of an attorney for the Chickasaw Nation. So all of this documentation was there in the interviews and everything that happened to her. Well, her daughter, Ella, which is my great grandmother, I wasn't sure I could find as many pages as in the first book. And I was worried when I started to tell her story And lo and behold, I found another 80 pages of documentation of her battling about her allotment, taking the Dawes Commission to the U.S. Supreme Court. And it was just, I was elated that I was going to find that much material again.
So let's talk about your great grandmother, Ella. She obviously had a hard life, and when I was reading the book, it just seemed like she really couldn't catch a break. So many terrible things happened to her, one right after the other. What was it like to explore her life and put her life onto pages?
Well, I think it was painful at first because my grandfather was fluent in Chickasaw, and so he told me a lot of stories. And he died when I was about 8 years old. But his sisters, Minnie, Bessie, and Romy, that you read about in the book, which is Ella's daughters, filled a lot of the gaps about Ella that I was missing within those Dawes Commission stories. But I was so shocked when I found her battle for the allotment and how much was transcribed about that, dealing with issues with other people trying to take the land from her that she thought was her allotment, and then finding out it was land that she couldn't even use. It couldn't be cultivated, it was rocks. But I was able to fill in the gaps with journals from my my great aunts and from some documents that my great grandmother wrote. And I still had those, thank goodness. So I became aware of her. I became kind of knowing who she was, reading in between the lines of how many times she was questioned.
When she appears in this book, it seems like you have a real sense of getting her voice. Does that come through all of these interviews with family and journals and documents? Because you paint a really good picture of how she may have experienced her life, but this was quite a long time ago.
It was quite a long time ago, and of course I wasn't there. But by reading, I guess I was reading between the lines because all of a sudden I felt her pain, I felt her frustration, and then I also felt as a woman that she was very politically aware of what was happening in her environment and how the landscape was changing from Indian Territory to a statehood in Oklahoma. She was aware of all that, and I could feel her frustration and wanting to keep her culture and how she was raised. She wanted to be a farmer and raise crops and do the things she was taught. And all of a sudden, she was finding out that her whole way of thinking was going to have to change. And I guess she became so resilient in so many ways. I could see that. But then I also saw this grit in her that she just had a drive that she was going to be on this mission and she was going to accomplish it. And she did.
So this book,
Not exactly in the way she wanted, Colton, but she did.
yeah. So this book is described as a a woman who was fiercely determined. Tell me about this book. Give me a summary of who this woman is and some of the things that she encountered in terms of keeping her family provided for, fighting for land, and also trying to keep a commitment to her culture.
Well, I think that her battle began with her mother having her mother experience four deaths of her her stepfathers and then her real father. And so I think that her grit became early in her childhood and her strength from her mother passed down to her. And then I think that what I found with the research was that Ella was determined to make things right in a homeland that was now a new homeland. She wanted it to be the same as what her ancestors had given up, and she was determined to make that happen. And in reading her life story about how she took her children with her wherever she went, and she put them in a wagon, four of them in the back of the wagon and drive for 10 days to talk to the Dawes commissioners. And then 2 months later, she'd put them in the wagon again and go to another place. She was driven with her training of horses. She loved horses, and that was passed on to me. And I feel like that she had a real determination to make a difference in the indigent women of that time.
When it comes to Indian women of that time as well, I mean, a lot of them were taken advantage of, as we see here clearly in this book. What was it like for you to explore some of those shady dealings of people not being treated fairly or being just tricked out of what was theirs?
Well, the man that she had been dealing with, that she encountered in the court clerk's office, this gentleman he was trying to come in and buy Indian land up, and he was sneaking in between Native people getting their allotments and trying to purchase land. And she knew of him because she had encountered him when she had gone to this land to survey to figure out if she could actually live on this rocky piece of land. And she found out that she couldn't. But this gentleman, she was determined that she would never sell her land to him. And then when I started going to the court clerk's office in Ardmore and researching, I found out that a man who bought her land was the middleman, and he didn't pay her fair price, but she was happy to sell it to him because it wasn't this other man that she disliked so much. And then all of a sudden, about a page and a half further, I see to where this man has sold it to the grifter or the bad guy for $1. And he had also bought my Papa Harry's land for $1 the same way. He used a middleman. So here she was, she was fooled. It was trickery. The same thing that happened when her 3 children went to school at Bloomfield School. And there was trickery going on there, and her kids were removed from that school and brought home in the middle of an afternoon, and she thought everything was fine. And then this superintendent lost his job. And I found that in the newspaper, the article. I knew something about the Bloomfield School because my great aunts, Minnie, Romy, and Bessie, had told me it was not a good experience. And they told me some things, but they said something terrible happened, but they didn't tell me what it was. And I found that in newspaper through the research of local newspapers at that time. It was a revelation, Colton. I want to tell you, I was so excited to take that story even further. It was painful, though, I will tell you, because I knew these women, and it was painful to be reading in a paper about what actually happened to them.
And also the newspaper article going on to say that they were calling for the arrest of that superintendent that, humiliated your family members.
Exactly. And I had researched a book that was written about Bloomfield School, and I saw that superintendent was not there for but only 6 months. And I even called the author of that book to find out what she knew about Bloomfield School and why the superintendent had lost his job, and she didn't know. But I think that something higher power led me to locate that newspaper article because it truly exemplified the kind of mistreatment of our Native families during that time.
Yeah, and Bloomfield, of course, a school for girls or Chickasaw, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, it was built, I think, around the 1850s, but it was the school of choice for educating and removing our Chickasaw girls from their family and their culture, but it was the way that they could be educated at that time.
So your book explores so many things, obviously, that many Native American communities have dealt with: boarding school, cultural eradication, the taking of land, sexual assaults. When people read your books and they maybe not have been familiar with these types of things that have happened in these communities, what is their response to it?
Well, I think one of the main things, the purpose of me telling this story is my story is not just my story. I think it's many Native American families' ancestors' story. And I hope by revealing this story to other Native American families, they'll understand they were not the only one who went through this kind of pain. But to the non-natives, I think it's important for them to understand that our people, our tribes, were in a situation where they felt like they were living in a land that had been given to them from a land that was taken away. And now again, 50, 60 years later, the land was going to be taken away once again. And I think non-natives need to understand the process of pain and humiliation that these people went through during that time. Our people really suffered again, not once, but twice in that removal of their homelands.
We talk a lot in Native communities about what's the phrase? Generational trauma.
Yes.
Wondering, to this day, how maybe you and your family have experienced that, possibly because of the number one, forced removal of your family from Mississippi to Oklahoma, then the allotment of the lands, and that's dirty dealings, having their land once more taken away to move somewhere else. I mean, the book does thankfully end on more of a positive note, but I'm sure some of those dealings and some of those issues have transcended down to your family to this day.
Absolutely. I think what has driven my current family today is to start to rebuild our concept of our own culture, to look back at our people and know what they went through, and to try to build up the culture again, to try to install a history that our grandchildren, my grandchildren, will understand, and to know about the tribes that came into the 39 tribes that came into the state of Oklahoma and what they went through. And because of that, I have my two sons, both work now for the Chickasaw Nation. Both are taking courses to learn the language. And we are really surrounding our family, trying to surround our family with a greater understanding of our past. And I think that's the most important thing that we can do. The pain that we have gone through, I think, instilled more in me than in my two sons, because my mother originally didn't want to talk about being a Native American. And as she saw the tribes building up again and building the cultures, then her pride came back. And then she was willing to share more stories with me about what my grandfather and my great grandmother went through. But for a while there, she was very private about all of that. She didn't want to share that with me. And I don't think it was shame. I think it was just fear that she might not be accepted in a community where she would talk about those kinds of things, and she wanted to be accepted.
We read a lot about, or hear a lot about, people who are like pretty much what you're doing right now. Looking back into their native culture, their heritage, and writing about it and finding out about things that they hadn't known before. Was this sort of like a healing process for you?
Well, I did a lot of crying in some places. In fact, I remember one moment I was reviewing my book and looking at it and editing the pages, and my husband looked up at me and he said, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "Well, I'm reading my pages." And he said, "But they're your pages." And I said, "Yes, but it's my life, and it's still painful when I think about my family going through that." So it was hard, but it also was a revelation for me to find out really truly what happened in the past, to dig deep enough to know the full story of things and not to just hear pieces of it and try to put those puzzle pieces together. I really felt like I had put all those pieces together in a methodical way to portray my great grandmother as the brave woman I knew she was. And my grandfather always told me that she taught him the quiet excitement for life. Quiet excitement. Now that's kind of an oxymoron, how can we think about excitement being quiet? But now I know what he means. I mean, those tales were whispers and quiet stories that developed into big stories later for us to understand the past and the pain of the past. So it was a quiet excitement. And as I went through her life, I felt very excited to let her story out so other people would know about her and other Native women just like her.
What do you hope people take away from your book?
I hope they take away a sincere regard for all our tribes, and I hope they take away also an uplifting feeling for all women who had struggled during that time, because we were a matrilineal society then, and the mother was kind of the head of the family. And we understand her pain because she led her family to greater good. And it was because of her and her mother that we're here today as a result of her struggles. So I want people to see that even though maybe they were not a part of a tribe, they could see how America was founded and how that these people changed the world that we live in today.
So what is next for you? Are you writing another book?
Well, yes, I am. And it's interesting because somebody said, "Well, how are you going to go forward with the story from here?" Well, actually, I'm not going forward, Colton. I'm going to go backwards. I'm actually going back into the 1830s, and I'm going to try to delve into when my early ancestors first came here, when there wasn't anything to build upon, when there wasn't towns and railroads coming in. And it's going to be on the Blue River, which was a big part of where the settlers came into Indian Territory here. So it's going to be an adventure story. And I am doing research with it, just like I did with the first two books. But I'm hoping it'll be more developed into a fantasy kind of adventure story that I can tell people about how the Indians made the land their own when they first came here to Indian Territory.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Oh my gosh. Any last things of note that you'd like to let our listeners know before we close this conversation?
Well, I would like for whoever is reading Where Birds Land, for also for them to get Little Bird, because I think it is a sequel. They will stand alone, but they are two different women that went through two different kinds of crisis in their life to get where they are today. So I hope people will read both books and have a greater understanding of our indigent people and how they survived in this new world called America.
Wow. All right. Where can people get your books?
Well, you can get my book at chickasawpress.com. You can get at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's available on Kindle. So there's lots of resources out there. You can Google Mary Ruth Barnes. There's some video trailers on both books. I hope you will take a look at those. Chickasaw Nation does a beautiful job. The video trailers are out on YouTube, so you can see those as well. It's like going to the movies for about 2 minutes. So do that, please.
I was going to ask before we go too. Obviously, with the really strong development of the character, and we had seen things like Killers of the Flower Moon, for instance. I mean, could you see this being made into like a TV show or a movie one day?
I'm hoping, I absolutely, because it is I think it's very cinematic. If you read it, I think that you feel like you're almost in a movie. And I felt like as I was writing, researching and writing the story, I felt like I was living someone else's movie. So absolutely, I think it would be great if we could combine those two stories into one very cinematic story for our people.
Well, I gotta say, your publisher sent me the book. I got it on Monday. I took it home Monday evening and I finished it Tuesday before noon. So that's how much
Oh,
of a page turner was for me. I just kept
wow,
thinking,
that's wonderful. Read Little Bird, Colton, because it'll be another page turner as well.
I just had to see how does this woman get through all this?
I know. Isn't it just amazing? You turn the pages. The first book, Little Bird, will make you cry a lot. The second book will just make you angry because she went through way too much. But the survival of these women is just beyond me. And the Three Crows in the first book, you'll have to read about them because they are part of our family. And I have three crows that live on our ranch where I live now. And every time I see them, I think of the two books I wrote about. So thank you for enjoying my book. I appreciate the kind comments.
Absolutely. All right, Mary Ruth Barnes is our guest on Here Before Here Now. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Colton.
So that was my conversation with Mary Ruth Barnes. And as you can tell, she really went through it, right? Writing this book finding out these details about her ancestors and how some of the things that happened to her family 100 years ago is still impacting her and her family to this day. So if you are interested, I highly recommend checking this out. As we talked about in the conversation, I literally saw like a movie from this. I mean, I also read Killers of the Flower Moon, which was adapted into a movie as well. And I saw a lot of parallels in what happens and what has happened in these Indian communities out in Oklahoma. So yeah, check it out. Again, it's called Where Birds Land. She mentioned where you can get this, get the books from Amazon. Just Google it and check it out for yourself. Yeah, let me know what you think. That's going to do it for this episode of Here Before, Here Now. Again, November is Native American Heritage Month, so if you have any ideas or guests or anyone that you'd like to hear on the show, please reach out to me, colton.schoen@azfamily.com. Until next time.